Welcome to another episode of the 8-Bit Guy. So recently a fan of mine sent me the Game Boy Camera. This would essentially be an early digital camera from the late 1990s. It did come out in 1998, but don't expect too much from it. It did sell for $49. So let's review it. It's actually a whole cartridge that slides into the Game Boy. It will also work on a Game Boy Pocket, a Game Boy Color, a Game Boy Advance, and even my GB Boy clone that I have. However, it doesn't really offer any advanced features on, the higher end later model Game Boys like the Advance or the Color because it was strictly designed for the original Game Boy. So it only operates in 4 shades of gray, or essentially, black and white. You may notice the camera is looking slightly up from the screen. The reason for this is most likely due to the nature of the reflective screens on these old Game Boys that required you to hold them at an angle so that light could reflect off of them. That would allow the camera to be angled straight ahead while holding the Game Boy at this angle. So let's power it on and see what it does. When you power it on, you get this little dancing Mario. After you press a button, you get the option to shoot, view, or play. So let's pick shoot. So the next screen you get, I'll come back to some of these other features later, but for the moment, let's go shoot. So you can see what it looks like here in my studio. The up and down controls will change the brightness of the picture. Okay, that's way too bright. There's some sort of delay between changing it and when the camera actually responds, which tends to cause me to overshoot on these controls. So the key is to go slowly. Okay, so the left and right controls will adjust the contrast, and you can see what effect that has on the picture. I keep hoping one of these controls is going to make the image look a lot better, but it's really a lost cause. Okay, so I'm going to try to take a selfie here. This thing just barely has enough resolution to capture a person's face and be recognizable. So I'll push A to snap the picture, then it'll ask me if I want to save it or cancel. So I'll go ahead and save. I decided I should try taking some outdoor photos, so I went down to the 9/11 Memorial here in my city of Kennedale. This was actually built with a piece of the original steel structure of one of the Twin Towers. There's also a big clock tower next to it, so I snapped some photos of that. And there's also a fountain next to it with an eagle in the middle. Did I mention that you can rotate the camera around like this so that you can take selfies? Was this the first ever selfie camera? It might have been, at least for a digital camera. I also went to the park and tried to photograph the ducks and these geese. One of these geese bit me in the rear end one day when I was at this park. And so let's take a look at some of these photos I took. This time we'll pick view. So you can just pick a picture and view it. So this is the 9/11 Memorial. So let's talk about the resolution. So I already mentioned that it's 4 shades of gray, which is limited primarily by the Game Boy's LCD screen. As for the resolution, officially it's supposed to do 256 by 224 pixels. However, I find this hard to believe because the Game Boy screen is only 160 by 144 pixels. And as you can see, they don't even use the entire screen. And I'm actually estimating it to be closer to 130 by 100 pixels. So it turns out the cartridge will actually store about 30 pictures on its own battery-backed RAM. So you can actually take the cartridge out and even stick it in an entirely different Game Boy and still see your photos. Heck, it will even work in the Super Game Boy adapter for the Super Nintendo, and you can view your pictures on a TV. So one of the things I find interesting looking back at the late 1990s, digital cameras were kind of new, and one of the big complaints that the naysayers had, saying the technology would never take off, was they said you couldn't get prints made, or at least not easily made, of your photographs. And that was sort of true, but it seems kind of ridiculous today looking back because we rarely even print photos today, so especially with the proliferation of online social media and whatnot. We tend to prefer our pictures in digital format. But at the time, it was fairly important to people, so Nintendo had that covered with the Game Boy printer. Now this little accessory was $59, and it came out around the same time as the Game Boy Camera, and while it does work with a few other games, its primary purpose was to be used in conjunction with the camera. I bought this one on eBay, and it's a brand new old stock printer. This sucker has never been opened and still has the original Nintendo seals on it. It has one of these little RFID security tags. It looks like it might have come from Toys R Us. Well, time to cut the seal. Okay, so inside we get a printer, obviously, and a manual, and a cable. The box looks empty, but I can feel some weight on the bottom, so So maybe it's a power adapter? I'll have to cut this seal too. Okay, so it comes with 6 AA batteries. I wonder if these are still any good. They should be close to 20 years old now, but I don't see an expiration date on them. Okay, so here's the printer. This thing definitely looks brand new, and here's the cable that it comes with it. I was curious why it had 3 connectors on it, and I had to look in the manual, and it turns out the original Game Boy used a different connector type. I didn't know that because I've never owned the original model. I didn't find any paper, but it says it includes 1 roll of printer paper. However, upon further inspection, I found it hiding under here. I decided to go ahead and use the old batteries it came with. I turned it on and the power light came on, but it goes right back off. I'm not sure if that's normal. I checked the voltage on all of the cells and they all read 1.5 volts, so I think they're all good. So the next thing to do is install the roll of paper. Then I connected it to the Game Boy and tried to print, but it would never work. So I decided to remove the batteries and put brand new ones in here. So let's try that again. Okay, so this time it worked, but I noticed the image was very light, hard to see. And by the way, this paper isn't just regular thermal paper. You can actually peel off the backing and it becomes a sticker. I wondered if the old thermal paper had just gone bad. A viewer of mine had also recently sent me this paper, which says it's for a calculator, but happens to be the right size for the Game Boy printer. You can see the roll is smaller, but it's also just regular paper. There's no sticky backing to it. Anyway, I fed the paper into the printer and tried the test print, where you hold down the feed button when you power it on. Well, this certainly looks darker than my last printout. So I went back to the Game Boy and tried printing my picture again. This time it was much darker, so that confirms the old paper had just gone bad after 2 decades of storage. So here's the final result, and the image is ridiculously small. It's about the size of a postage stamp. And even then, the resolution is still terrible. Now let's compare it with the printout from the original paper. And since it's so small, I wanted to have a closer look at the picture on the paper, so I put it in my flatbed scanner. And here's the scan of the paper. And here's a capture from the Game Boy's video output. So there really isn't much of any difference. I was sort of hoping the printout might be higher resolution than the on-screen version, but it doesn't appear to be. Well, let's take a look at some of the other photos I took. Here's some more of the 9/11 memorial and the clock tower. And this is probably my favorite photo that I took with this camera. Another thing I'd like to point out is that these pictures were never really meant to be viewed in large like this. They were meant to be viewed on the tiny Game Boy screen or on the postage stamp sized printout, so the lack of resolution would be less noticeable. So let's look at some of the other items on the cartridge. Some of this stuff like Run doesn't do much besides just show weird pictures from ROM. Under Magic you can do all sorts of things like montage pictures or panoramas. Under Items you can do self-timer or time-lapse. There are also a variety of little embedded games you can find in different places. Oh, and you can draw or use stamps on your photos that you took. So this is a photo of my cat here, and I'll stick some funny eyes on her. And the last thing I'll show you is how to erase all the photos from memory. Just hold down the start and select buttons when you power on the device, and it'll ask if you want to erase everything. So what do I think of the Game Boy Camera? Well, I do believe the camera was designed primarily as an entertainment device, not so much something for serious digital photography. That being the case, keeping in mind that a typical Game Boy game usually cost around $30 during the mid-1990s, this would have been only slightly more than buying a regular game, and it certainly provided at least a few hours of entertainment, so there's no doubt about that. However, from a perspective of me wanting to use it for photography, I actually get a kick out of using old crappy digital cameras sometimes, and I've done several of those in previous episodes. And sometimes I enjoy the challenge, but I have to be honest, I have to draw the line somewhere. And I draw the line at the Game Boy Camera. It's just a little bit too crappy for me to really be able to enjoy using it. And, but it is a neat device. It's got a lot of historical perspective on it. So, I like it for that aspect, but definitely not something that I want to use for taking, family photos on. Well, anyway, I hope you did enjoy this episode, and stick around. I've got more coming on the way. So thanks for watching.